8, 7, 6, 5, and we are live.
Great. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the second day of Points of View Dialogues. I am Amogh, and I'll be your moderator for today. So, the 2021 Convocation Week talk series Points of View, in conjunction with NID's annual design show, is a forum for dialogue between young designers, practicing professionals, and academic leaders. Each 90-minute session will have guest speakers from the design industry, student speakers, roundtable discussions, and audience Q&A. Lines of Sight 2021 documents and exhibits the pluralities in our unique ways of seeing as design students, young practitioners, and as an institution. Lines of Sight can be accessed through linesofsight.nid.edu. So, as remote learners and teachers, we've spent most of the past year as nearsighted beings living in teleworlds. The act of seeing becomes more significant than ever. It has to be thought of anew to develop active seeing, active listening, thoughtful reflection, and careful action. As designers, we're learning to see again by slowing down our processes, taking time to reflect, and showing care in our efforts. Exhibiting over 180 classroom and graduation projects virtually, and as a pop-up show on the NID Ahmedabad campus, Lines of Sight probes into themes of inclusivity, speculation, technology, sustainability, narratives, archives, contextual to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, education, health and well-being, and culture studies. The curatorial theme for Lines of Sight follows 5 sights. Foresight, the act of envisioning paths to reach an outcome or solving a problem. Insight, the potential for design as an epistemic practice. Hindsight, the sight for reflecting on histories, archives, crafts, and holistic ideas of narratives. Oversight, reflecting on what was missed out on systemically and in practice. And Farsight, speculating on futures that are ecologically sustainable, inclusive of all identity, and egalitarian in nature. For today's panel, we have with us today Param Venkataraman, who is our guest speaker, Mamata Rao, who's our faculty interlocutor, and the discipline lead in interaction design and the dean of the NID Bangalore campus, and our student speakers. So I'd also like to introduce my fellow curators of this event series. So Charita Beniwal, Tanishka Kachru, who are both faculty, and student curators, Amruta, Abhirami, Geetika, and Ritika. Here's the format of events planned for today. We'll start by this introduction that I'm giving right now, followed by an address by a guest speaker, where Param will talk about his work done in a very future-facing industry and his ideals of leadership that shape his practice. Following that, we'll have brief presentations by the student speakers whose work falls under the theme of Farsight and addresses our various ways of looking at the future. After this, we've got a roundtable discussion planned with all the panelists, following which we'll open the floor to the audience for their questions. Dear audience, please note down all your questions in the comments and the chat section. We will be taking them up towards the end of the session. The theme for today's session is Farsight. The Farsight track showcases projects that look at the idea of the future through multiple design lenses. From the expansion of the future scope of a singular project to acts of world building set at various points of time to situate their design in, Farsight acquires multiple forms as a line of sight. As the world goes through what one may call the most transformative period in recent history, it becomes important to acknowledge the role that speculation can play in navigating through moments of unrest and discord and envision futures that are ecologically sustainable, inclusive, and egalitarian. The notion of problem solving extends beyond the wicked problems of today to cosmotechnics and looking beyond a human-centered understanding of design. Foresight projects can be viewed on our website. Once again, I'd like to welcome our guest speaker for today, Param, who's been in design and innovation leadership roles across companies like IDEO, Dr. Reddy's, Kantar, GE Healthcare, and Sapient Corporation. He has been instrumental in setting up and establishing strategic design capabilities and culture in several organizations. And he is currently the Chief Design Officer at Fractal Analytics, a company driving innovation in artificial intelligence and machine learning-based business solutions. Thank you for coming today, Param, and the floor is all yours. Please share with us your thoughts and your work.
Thank you. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Amogh and Tanishka, Praveen. Thank you so much for inviting me here and being part of this event. Super excited to be part of this conversation, and especially the topic that you've selected and the themes are very, very fascinating. So very excited to be here and look screen and get started on the presentation that I'd like to walk through. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Should we get started? Amogh? Okay, you're on mute, but I'm assuming you said
Yeah.
yes. Okay. Once again, apologies about my camera. There's some problem with the camera, and so the picture quality of my camera is very poor. All right. Thank you for inviting me to this conversation about Farsight. This is a conversation that provoked a lot of thought, a lot of ideas, a lot of reflection, and looking back retrospectively at the last several years that I've been doing different kinds of work, and I was quite fascinated with the topic that was selected. These were some of the prompts that were shared in the poster that was shared with me about how can we design for the future when our vision is obscured by the uncertainties of the present. Number one. Number two, how can seeing become a process? And I've struck political because I don't think I'm an expert to talk about how this might impact political process, but I'd like to talk about how it might impact the design process, or more broadly, the problem solving process, so that our sight expands and so does the ability to see beyond a static mindset and a single reality. So these are the two themes that I'm going to focus on. And at the outset, one of the things that I shared with Amogh and Tanishka in the early days was that, look, I'm a practitioner. I've been in the industry for all these years. I look at the idea of Farsight from the perspective of how organizations are trying to look at their future and how we as designers and design thinkers can support them in that process. That's my view, and a lot of what I'll be sharing today is based on that real world experience and learnings and a lot of mistakes that I've made over the years. Here's just to give you a gamut. 10, 15 years, it resonated with the topic that was given to me. In 2010, I worked with a very big technology company, among the top 100 Fortune 100 companies, where we were thinking about what could be the future of 2020. This was a very interesting project that I did for a large consumer goods company. Years from now, of course, I told them the future of hair care from my vantage point is bald. There were, of course, much bigger sort of trends and ideas that were coming out from that. Like, for example, one of the questions that we thought shortage in different parts of the country. And this is back in 2011, right? So, and literally a few years after that, the first set of cities in India, including Chennai, started seeing that situation of water scarcity. And what that would do to the future of hair care as a consumer. We use water for everything that we do, whether it's the shampoo or the conditioners or whatever. Something as simple as that can change the way you think about new products or new ways of thinking about your category. The third one, in the last few years, prior to joining Fractal, I was immersed in this question of what is the future of healthcare and what is the future of medicine. Can there be a world beyond? Can people get well, including but beyond medicines? And that's something that I spent some time working on. This is something that's currently been of my focus in the last couple of years, which is what is the future of human decision making, where analytics, big data, AI, and design are all coming together to help companies and help people take better decisions in their various aspects of their lives. And more broadly, over the last 10, 12 years, I've also been trying to learn and see how can companies reinvent and stay relevant and keep themselves as future-proof as possible using design thinking. So a lot of what I'm going to be sharing today is a kind of a amalgamation or different nuggets that I've learned from that, as well as some ideas and questions that we could all use to think about and discuss a little later. So my thought on this, my point of view here for the next few minutes is going to be about, when we say Farsight, what we're really talking about, what I think is important to think about is what is the way we as human beings think about the future? How do we as people relate with the future? How do we, what comes up for us attitudinally when we look at different aspects of the future and looking into the forward? And so when I started thinking about this question, that how do we as people look at the thought for me was that we think and manifesting, and we start relating with it from the vantage point of hopes or fears. This is very, very deep rooted. It's fundamental. It's really, really almost non-conscious or subconsciously happening. Some of it is conscious too. So, there are hopes and fears about the future. The hope is, for example, the good news is that the future is getting closer and closer. If you look at over the last several, starting with the African hand axe, which was invented probably 285,000 years back, remained the same for literally, so many, millennia before it started getting more and more, more better versions or other better tools started getting designed for that same solution. In the Middle Ages, with the advent of agriculture, warfare, building technology, that failure loop started reducing to centuries, and not, compared to the axe, the African axe. And then in the third life cycle, if you see the Industrial Revolution, now the innovation sort of cycle is becoming decades. And now beyond the Industrial Revolution, in the so-called Industrial Revolution 4.0 or whatever it is that people call it, it's becoming years, if not months, and it's getting shorter and shorter. And I think that's the good news, which is that from a Farsight standpoint, we actually don't need to look that far into the future if we are trying to think about new ideas and new products or new solutions or new solutions for different problems. But the fear is that when we look at different ideas that come from the future, we tend to be skeptical about some of these futures, some of these possibilities. Back in 1995, Nicholas Negroponte, one of the foremost MIT Media Lab thinkers, talked about the fact that we will soon be buying books and newspapers straight over the internet. Newsweek, of course, looked at that and said, "Yeah, right, that's not going to happen." And of course, that turned out. And this is a fascinating TED talk that Nicholas future. And he talks about very, very detailed sort of scenarios that were presented back in the 70s. And I'm going to share some excerpts from it. Literally triggers those kind of skepticism. Almost unbelievable. Normally we use the word unbelievable, used it here in the context of more of a fear. And I'm going to share this short, show you this the audio.
And this for me was sort of not.
Can someone give me a thumbs up? Is the audio playing?
Yes.
Beginning of what I'll call, and I pick fingers partly about how to use fingers. 3 reasons. One was they were low resolution. The other is your hand. And the third, which was the winner, was that your device has never even been picked up. It's not just touch sensitive, it's pressure sensitive. a yellow circle there. Later work, and again, that when to sort of do interface.
Param, we're having a technical glitch. The audio and the video are a little dodgy. So if you could please share the link to this, we can try sharing it from our end.
Okay. For the benefit, hopefully you're able to see the video. Are you able to see the video?
It's still patchy. It's breaking up.
I think there's some bit of a lag problem there.
Yeah.
Okay, let's continue. And
26 air.
Okay, it's completely gone now.
France did an extraordinary.
It's not playing at all.
No, it keeps pausing and then there's a lag.
Okay, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah.
Just take a little time and.
Yeah, I think it's a network issue.
Yeah, it's saying I've hardly ever seen that message, but it came up now. So, okay, let me continue. Okay, so I think what folks that looked at this.
Sorry, Param, your voice seems to be breaking up. Sorry, folks. Param is facing network issues at his end. So let's just wait for it to resolve in a bit.
Has he been disconnected from the?
Yeah, we've lost him entirely.
Hello, we're very sorry about this. Param is facing network issues at his end.
So Amogh, Param might need a little more than a few minutes because they are facing major issues.
He's joined.
Yeah, okay, but he's still. Param, should we play the videos or do you still need more time?
Is this better now?
It's still quite patchy. We can. Okay, you're on mute now.
Okay. What the problem is?
No, we are still losing you. It's quite patchy.
Okay. Why don't you go ahead, Tanishka, with the videos that you were planning to share? I'll come back in a few minutes.
Okay, sure. Amogh, should we just switch and do the videos first, the
Yeah,
student project videos? Yeah. Okay.
great. Yeah. Let's start with the student projects that we would like to share with you all for Farsight. So the Farsight track started with this very simple idea that everything we design for a point in the future. So what are the kind of futures that we're addressing through our design? And in the past year and a half, our ability to even see through the near future has been affected by the obfuscations of the present, and it made it hard for us to keep going. And in the far side track of lines of sight, we would like to highlight some of these projects which saw beyond these obfuscation and directed our lines of sight to face the future. First up, we have Ayush Khare's project, Coded Color. Geetika, please turn on the audio.
Are you not able to hear the audio
No.
at all?
There's no audio at all.
Okay. Try sharing the screen again. Sorry, my bad.
Generated imagery. Hello, I'm Ayush Khare, a student of photography design. My project, Coded Color, is an inquiry into the politics of identity in the world of artificial intelligence. It looks at algorithmic bias in AI-generated imagery. Human thinking is characterized by categorization, and it is a built-in byproduct of human design systems. These incorporated categorizations can sometimes echo and amplify problematic social perceptions. Through this project, I'm looking at how a perception of racial identities can creep into such systems. The project started with a curiosity to investigate the role of photography and its relationship with this new medium of making images. Today, when there are more cameras than people, what does it mean to have a unique image produced just with a click of a button? This inquiry led me to explore different platforms and software that allowed me to create images. When I landed on one such platform where I could generate people's faces just by adjusting a few sliders, my curiosity spiked. The platform allowed me to adjust the characteristics of my face based on 6 racial sliders: Asian, Arabic, Black, Indian, Latino Hispanic, and white. I could have a face looking more Indian or less black just by moving the respective sliders. I wanted to understand what precisely does the algorithm do when I ask it to produce just an Indian face. The sliders, by default, allowed me to move within a specified range. However, when I tried to increase the values beyond it, the system started breaking down. And in this breakdown of the system, I could get a closer look at the algorithm. An Indian face meant redder skin, a bigger nose, bigger lips. A white face meant blonde hair, longer face, white teeth. So I decided to break the limit on each slider, which led me to generate a total of 540 images, which I present here as a grid. Today, when machine learning techniques are being used and controlled by people in power, it is crucial to understand their implications. In many countries, facial recognition software is already being used by the police and the governments, and there have been several incidents of it delivering unethical results. Now the problem becomes more serious when majority of people are not educated about it. When designing for the future, we often get lost in the thrill of doing something new and overlook the old or the already existing. So while it is vital to design technologies ethically and inclusively and be accountable towards them, it is even more important to educate people about them and make them aware of their implications. The way we see things is affected by what we know. Without knowledge, there is no sight. You can look, but you cannot see. Thank you.
Thank you, Ayush. Up next is this project by Isal Shukla, 27th of March 2021.
My name is Isal Shukla, and this is about my project, Ruminations from 27/3/2021. This is a comic that I made during lockdown, and it's basically a reflection of all my thoughts and ideas. You can't help but think what it is you really want to do, and you're looking for purpose and meaning in your life. And as people of the young generation, you really want to kind of know where you fit into this confusing ensemble of ideas that we call society. So the initial intention of this project was to try and use narrative as a way to incite optimism and creativity by creating a story that people can possibly relate to. And since there's so many of us who feel stuck and are so confused at this point in time, things are actually rapidly evolving around us, despite it looking like everything's come to a standstill. Our way of life is changing drastically. This whole idea of the loss of physicality and an emergence in virtual conveniences such as cryptocurrency, NFTs, and the metaverse. And we're relying on these ideas to provide meaning and security, but at the same time, we're also becoming dependent on it. So there's this whole paradigm shift that's taking place, and it's really confusing for people like me to try and figure out where we kind of fit into this whole picture. So this comic is essentially just an honest accumulation of things that I could think about when it comes to the future, to try and perhaps create a sense of optimism, both for myself and for others. It's an attempt at glorifying our future, even if it's one that's not meant to be. But I want to be able to look at it in a positive light, in a way that contrasts the constant negativity and nihilism of our modern generation, and just use that hope to feel empowered instead of powerless. Think about how we want to play into this, where we stand in this changing, evolving world, and see how we want to contribute to it. So this is the kind of thing that I want to throw light upon. And as a designer, I kind of also want to create a means for people to realize this and break out of the feeling of dependence and integration with a consumerist society to a more think for yourself approach. And this project was perhaps also an exploration of how narrative can help trigger that kind of response from people. It was also just my way of finding and highlighting the good things so that I can feel more hopeful and optimistic about the future. And I think this project was an opportunity for me to try and express that.
Great. Up next is Siddhi Patil's graduation project, Co-Creating Farming Futures.
Hello guys, this is Siddhi Patil, finally a young designer taking you on a journey to make art. From geography to weather to its people and culture, the Meghat region is unique. Although to the outside world, this region is known by malnutrition and Project Tiger. It's an area with rich culture and history, one that is deeply connected and intertwined with its climate and environment. So this journey reminded me of what I read in Arushi Bapna's graduation document. She writes, as a country, India doesn't live in the 21st century, but rather in different times that are parallel to each other. different parts of the country have different levels of accessibility to resources, infrastructure, and technology with respect to time. While there is hardly any documentation available on the Korku settlement, the culture, and the lifestyle, it is evident that the current lifestyle reflects the environment of its region and climate. While the area boasts of the world's largest teak or sagwan forest, it is also rich in bamboo, providing a foundation for the kacha houses where the Korkus inhabit. On the first glance, these dwellings may look like a child's drawing which has come to life. So now the most critical part of this project was the affirmative versus critical design debate. When I was on the field thinking about speculative design, I could see people who didn't have access to clean water. They had immediate concerns which needed to be addressed. In this chaos, I kept on questioning what is the relevance of speculative design? How can it be beneficial for the people on ground? How is a polished artifact, which is very alien, going to help them? Now, if you look at the projects in the same context globally, it's all focused towards bringing the farms into your homes. There weren't narratives which focused on the futures of the marginal communities I was working with. Why were they skipped from these futures? Do they not exist in these futures? What and how do they face these futures? If I'm going to extrapolate, the farming futures of Melghat, I can't proceed without involving these farmers. So rather than delivering solutions to the problems, the focus was on exploring what issues of the rural communities want to be heard and what questions policymakers should be asking. The project takes a kind of speculative design approach by telling stories about alternative futures, encouraging people to think critically about the present and the decisions that would need to be taken to make such futures a reality. This project was about making the speculative design process accessible. A lot of times, when we work with these communities, it's difficult to translate all these thoughts uh, that have an extremely vested Eurocentric origin to somebody who has never left their village. Therefore, it's not a limitation of their ability to understand, it's just a different world or reality. And you have to respect the reality of the people with whom you're interacting.
Bo abacha bo abacho kiti gome ja darshan dada ja bo abacho kiti gome ja darshan dada ja.
Thank you, Siddhi. Up next, we have
Hello, guys. This is Siddhi.
Sorry, give me a second.
yeah. So up next we have uh, Urja Javeri, who would be talking about her project, The Apathetic Indian, Speculating for Change.
Nearly 75% of India's qualified working population still believes that they have no say in the government or any role to play in improving community welfare. Hi, I'm Urja Zaveri, a freshly minted young designer from NIT Ahmedabad, and today I'm elaborating on one aspect of my graduation project work that stemmed from a simple idea. What if we actually involve people in creating and articulating the futures that they want? It has already been more than a decade since the idea of feedback loops got implemented in the public sector, starting with washrooms in India taking feedback on toilet experiences of users at airports and railway stations. Since then, Customer feedback and user response has become an activity prevalent in almost all services we use today, from Amazon shopping experiences to Swiggy deliveries. Most new ventures are incorporating the act of collecting this data and asking people what more do they want, seeing the potential value it holds in quick learning and improving what's currently in use. Even Google or Facebook has a new software update every couple of few weeks, right? Only if we constantly report bugs, record feedback, and immediately start working on the new updates can we make significant changes in seemingly short period of time through small actions but consistent efforts towards improvement goals. Despite this method being common knowledge and clearly knowing how these responses often provide insights into bigger system issues, it is baffling how the same idea hasn't been applied in urban planning or public policy by municipalities or civic bodies in India to solve small local problems or try to gain an insight into the quality of life of its city residents on important stuff like road quality, access to public amenities, thoughts on infrastructure proposals, etc. Why is planning for the future solely left as an activity for a few when the future belongs to everyone and it is constantly being shaped by small or big creations, behavior changes, and emerging lifestyle practices of today? While working on an SDG project in education for children in India, I realized that the problem was not only limited to a lack of awareness of SDGs or what they aim to achieve. It lies in the failure of an education system that doesn't involve children or young adults in building the future that they talk about. Why keep children's free flowing imagination and the passion of the young and the bold um, outside classrooms? Why not create a space or a way of its discourse within classrooms and then give them the freedom as individuals to pursue the future that they would love to live in? The interesting thing about toolkits that revolve around the act of speculating for change, like the apathetic Indian one, is that it involves active participation and it helps participants create scenarios. Scenarios that often define behaviors and events that could be considered or are somewhat expected but are not in practice. The only way we, as learning students, young designers, and individuals gathered here, can create the unexpected in times when the trajectory for the future is uncertain and yet to be forged is by thinking the unimaginable and ironically using our imagination and creativity to overcome it. Why can't we have citizen futurists already when the means of making it come to reality exist already? Thank you.
Thanks, Urja. That brings us to the end of the student projects we had for today. And we'd like to go back to Param now. Hi, Param.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Is this better? Is this hopefully going to work this time? Okay. All right, I'm going to try and share my screen again. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
And this time the audio is better? Okay. So,
It is, yeah.
okay, I'm going to kind of quickly do a recap. I was talking about hopes and fears as how it shapes the way we see the future. I spoke about the fact that both hopes and fears show up when it comes to how we think about the future. The first hope is, an example of a hope is, for example, the fact that the innovation life cycle is getting shorter and shorter. And what that means is that we don't need to see that far into the future. A hand axe was an innovation for 250,000 years. In the Middle Ages, that started coming down to a few centuries. And in the industrial age, it started reducing to a few decades. And now we are probably looking at, the idea of farsight being relevant to a few months. And, in some contexts, it's even a few weeks or less than months. When we see certain kinds of futures, we also start, the fear that starts showing up is that we get skeptical about these futures, like how Nicholas Negroponte talked about the fact that we will buy stuff over the internet. And Newsweek thought that's not going to be happening in 1995. And we, of course, know what happened after that. I'm going to try and play the video now. Hopefully, it will work this time better. If it doesn't, Amogh, please give me a shout out.
And this, for me, was sort of not yet the Media Lab, but was the beginning of what I'll call sensory computing. And I pick fingers partly because everybody thought it was ridiculous. Papers were published about how stupid it was to use fingers. 3 reasons. One was they were low resolution. The other is your hand would occlude what you wanted to see. And the third, which was the winner, was that your fingers would get the screen dirty. And hence, fingers would never be a device that you'd use. And this is a device we built in the 70s, which has never even been picked up. It's not just touch sensitive, it's pressure sensitive.
A yellow circle there.
Later work, and again, this was before TED 1.
Move that west of the diamond. Create a large green circle there. Shit.
Was to sort of do interface concurrently. So when you talked and you pointed and you sort of had, if you will, multiple channels. Entebbe happened, 1976. Air France was hijacked, taken to Entebbe. And the Israelis not only did an extraordinary rescue, they did it partly because they had practiced on a physical model of the airport. Because they had built the airport, so they built a model in the desert. And when they arrived at Entebbe, they knew where to go because they had actually been there. The US government asked some of us, 76, if we could replicate that computationally. And of course, somebody like myself says, yes, immediately. You get a contract, Department of Defense. And we built this truck and this rig. We did sort of a simulation because you had video discs. And again, this is 76. And then sort of many years later, you get this truck. And so you have Google Maps.
Amogh, were you able to hear everything clearly this time?
Yeah, great. Thank
Awesome.
you.
So as you can see from this video, right, I mean, a lot of what he's talking about, even gesture-based computing with voice, commands, and both of them in tandem against the screen. And, even in today's context, something like that would be quite futuristic, right? And this is way back in the 70s that they were working on this. Some of the hopes that we have about the future, when we are shown these ideas about the future in the context of a new but familiar idea, we actually become quite acceptable to it. So I don't know how many of you can guess this, but would you ever imagine that this is a bank? This picture is from a bank in the Bay Area back in 2014, 2015. It's a bank called Capital One. It's among the first few banks that started experimenting with this idea of a bank being imagined differently for the millennial consumer. And this is like a Starbucks meets a bank. So you can walk in there, grab a coffee, grab some food, whatever, and you can sit there and do your work on your laptops or meet with some people just like you do in a Starbucks. But also there are people standing by on the side who are from the bank in case you want to do some work with the bank in regards to your money. And again, a different picture of the same bank. Now, this is what I think is an great example of new but familiar. And when we see something like this, we get excited. We're like, wow, I could see some people who I can see on the video screen right now, their eyes lit up when they saw this, right? It was interesting because we would love to go to a bank like this, right? At least to have some coffee. But here's the other idea about the futures, right? Which is that certain kinds of futures, when it's in the context of something where the stakes are very high, for example, healthcare, we look for credibility as a way for us to know as a bridge from going from fears to hopes. So this is a company called Mamata Health. Way back, 5-6 years back, they started this idea of reversing type 2 diabetes, using just behavioral nudges and helping people, understand how to manage the disease and manage the condition with a lot of lifestyle changes and not just having medicines. This was fundamental, and with a lot of digital health interventions, using their mobile and tracking and all of that stuff that happens with digital devices now. So this was game changing because this was one of the first companies that did a clinical study and proved that they could do a reversal of type 2 diabetes by just doing non-medicine or behavioral interventions using digital health. This, of course, opened a floodgate of companies that became what is now known as the digital therapeutics category. And the whole learning for me is that when one success emerges, the future gets accelerated. And you know, when people start showing this kind of credibility in one area, in that category, in that new area, you know, many other people start following. And as you can see from this chart, this is just a sample of various startups that are addressing similar digital health approaches to different medical conditions, from neurology to respiratory to mental health and so on. The hope also is that, you know, if you look at something like telehealth, for example, telehealth as a technology has been one of those promising technologies and has been around for probably 20 years in terms of the technology, but it never got adopted by both the patients and by the medical fraternity. But it took a pandemic like COVID-19 to actually completely change that. And so what I'm seeing is an interesting thing where sometimes the future is thrust upon us. We don't like the scenarios that emerge from it, but guess what? Because of the lack of any other option, we adapt to it, because as human beings, we cope. That's, you know, a coping mechanism is to adapt and adjust with what's going on. And so some good things can happen out of that, which is that now telehealth has become such a much more mainstream thing than it has been in the last 15 years. There's also fears, which is that, you know, when you have to go on the path to the future and new ideas, it is fraught with failure, right? I mean, we all know that there are so many experiments that you have to do to get there. And failure is inevitable, and we all are afraid of that. We all, you know, resist that at some level. And this is a picture from this company called Weird Stuff. They gather all the unusable things that startups who have gone bust. You know, basically they sell off all their things, and you know, this is the company that buys all that from the Bay Area. So you can imagine all the stuff that is going there into, you know, literally showing the amount of failure that is there on the way, you know, to the future. So the question that I asked myself then is, how do we practice farsight when we think about all these hopes and fears? How can we, you know, get a little better and build some muscle in having more, you know, most of the time more hopes than fears? Although fears are actually not a bad thing, it can actually be, you know, if channeled in the right way, it can actually help us think about the future in a better way too. So I think the first thing that I've learned is that it's about asking better questions. Unfortunately, when we talk about the future, most people start obsessing about predicting the future or trying to get it right. Whereas I think what is more important is to actually just explore. Asking better questions will help us start thinking about the future in better ways. And I'll share with you a few examples, right? But the second point is, it's also about it's about being willing to let go of some of what I call the sacred cows. The sacred cows are these notions of what we think is the right way or the only way of doing something. And are we willing to let go of our ideas of what those sacred cows are? And I think that's the starting point for thinking about the future differently. And fundamentally, I think one of the students talked about this, I think Urja or someone else, but this is very powerful for me, which is, you know, Roger Martin calls this abductive thinking. That's a fancy term, but essentially what it is basically asking the question, what if? It's very different from inductive and deductive thinking that we're all used to from our education. What if is essentially things that we used to ask as children when we were much younger. And when, you know, that used to come naturally to us as children, but we stopped doing that as we became adults. And so this question is so powerful, it allows us to start thinking about possibilities and imagining the future differently. So these are some questions, you know, just to give you examples of what I meant by changing the way we think about these questions, the way we think about the future. What if the future of health was not needing any medicines? What if the future of the bank was not going to a bank, as I showed you a picture of that a few slides back? What if the future of transportation was not owning a car? And we've all been living through that in the last several years with Uber and, you know, all of these solutions being available at the top of a hat. And what if the future of work was not going to an office, right? Many of us are living that in the last 20 months, ever since the pandemic forced that upon us. But these are some very simple but very powerful questions for us to think about reimagining the way things work in our context today. But you know what comes in the way of this ability to see and look far? And I think this is fundamentally what for me is the biggest takeaway from this conversation. And I'm going to share with you one more last clip from Nicholas Negroponte's video, and then I'll tell you what that is.
This is a student of mine who had done a PhD called Backseat Driver. It was in the early days of GPS. The car knew where it was, and it would give audio instructions to the driver when to turn right, when to turn left, and so on. Turns out there are a lot of things in those instructions that back in that period were pretty challenging. Like, what does it mean, take the next right? Well, if you're coming up on a street.
Param, the audio's gone.
Said, don't patent.
Okay, it's back. It's gone again.
The patent office said, don't patent it. It'll never be accepted. The liabilities are too large. There'll be insurance issues. Don't patent it. So we didn't. But it shows you how people, again, at times, don't really look at really what's happening.
So, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So what I've seen is that what comes in the way of our ability to see far is our deeply held beliefs, fears, and mental models. What do I mean by that? Here are a few examples of a few beliefs. Banking needs a physical branch. People like to own their cars. It's a status symbol. We cannot invent a vaccine in 1 year, right? This is one of the most recent ones. What are some examples of fears? People will lose trust in their bank if there's no physical branch. It will mean cannibalization of our current business, which is in the context of automobile businesses. And vaccines will have significant side effects if they're made in a hurry, as we think about it from a fear standpoint. And what are some mental models that are similar, that are on the same lines? Banking is a serious business. It's not for doing something fun on your phone. It's not like playing on a mobile phone. Owning a car is a one-time high engagement investment. Whereas, using an Uber is a ongoing low engagement involvement. Very different mental models. And the last one about vaccines, our mental model of a vaccine is rigorous process, means a lot of time. You cannot produce this kind of a vaccine in 1 year. So in closing, what I want to say is that, to be able to see far, we really need to look deep within and see what are our fears, mental models, and barriers which are coming in the way of us not being able to see the future in a way that it could actually turn out to be. That's it. Thank you so much. And apologies once again for all the tech interruptions. I've never had this in so many presentations that I've made, but today happened to be my lucky day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Param. I think your point on the transition between hope and fear and hope was really relevant in the context of the student presentations as well. And the floor is now open for a roundtable discussion between today's speakers. I'd like to invite Param and today's faculty interlocutor Mamata and the student presenters Ayush, Isal, Siddhi, and Urja to share their thoughts, observations, and questions. Let's start with you, Param.
What's the question, Amogh?
Any thoughts and reflections on what we saw in the student project presentations?
I couldn't see much of it because of all the tech trouble, so I'll have to pass on that. I just saw a little bit of the last one that Urja made, but I missed most of the others, unfortunately.
Okay, Amogh, yeah. I would like to come in and let me, take this abductive thinking perspective that Param was talking about. So just to help our participants and even, the panelists understand that whole concept better, Param, let's say, take the example of healthcare and the diabetes context that you had stated. So if you were to start that from a abductive thinking process, would you be largely considering the design value that you would want to give after you have, so you wouldn't be thinking about a product, you wouldn't be thinking about a scenario. You will largely be thinking about the value per se. How do you start off?
I mean, to my mind, look, abductive thinking is very simple. It's basically imagining a possibility or asking a question without any frame of reference to current reality. In inductive and deductive logic, it's about looking at past evidence. It's looking at current reality. It's looking at logic and evidence to come up with a hypothesis or a question or even a solution. In abductive thinking, it's It's just asking what if.
Right.
And abductive thinking is a fancy term, but if you take away the terminology aside, it's really just asking us to be more imaginative, like the way we were as children. We never bothered, wondering. We used to ask, questions about everything. Why is this a certain way? Why can't this be in a certain way? What if this was a certain way, right? I mean, it's fundamentally that. I mean, it's nothing, and so it doesn't necessarily have to be a product or a design solution or whatever. And in my mind, actually, when we think about the future, it's less about the solution, it's more about the question. The question that we ask and that we begin with is more important than the answer. If you ask a question saying, what if the future of the bank was not going to the bank? It just completely changes the way we think about, that reality. So yeah, that's my initial thought.
Right. And when you ask questions of this nature, how important is it to connect to the target audience or be able to hear voices from different segments of the society?
I mean, 100%. I mean, it's super important, right? I mean, if you were to ask a speculative question like a what if in a very random sort of way, I mean, the idea is to be imaginative, but the idea is to not be removed from the reality of who you're solving the problem for. There are many examples of that, right? Like Google Lens, for example. Somebody probably said the first version of the Google Lens was that funny looking device that we all know was a big failure. Probably somebody asked that question saying, what if I could see something on my spectacles or whatever, and it could show me some digital some digital interactions or whatever. But the point is, what was that actually going to do for someone? I mean, they didn't think about that. End result, it was a failure because it wasn't relevant in the context of the people that were going to use it. So I think both are equally important. You have to think about what if, you have to ask imaginative questions and be open to those possibilities, but you have to be grounded in, fundamentally, is it solving a problem that people care about? If that doesn't happen, then it's just speculative. It'll just be a great idea, but you'll not see the reality of it.
Right. Amogh, I would like to talk to, Siddhi has something to ask or come in. Yeah, Siddhi.
Yeah, so like on terms what Param was saying that even what you said that the target audience is important and asking what if is also equally important. So what I wanted to ask or like put it out on the table is that how do we, make our target audience ask this what if question, because it also depends on who asks this what if question, because at times as designers, as I've said, that we forget that we are not the experts in that situation, and at times we forget that the people who live that experience daily are the ones who are experts in those situations. So how do we do that? Like how do we help, or as designers, how do we help these target audience or the people who live this experience daily to bring out the what if question?
Yeah, this question, when I saw your project, Siddhi, you did mention there about, a possibility of having these softwares and other application from bottom up, right? Somewhere you mentioned that. Why should Silicon Valley be producing everything? Why can't it be, a village? And so I was reflecting on that question. So in Farsight, there is also one point, possibly, this is my perspective and we can discuss over it, is to look at the next generation as well. So I can't be embedded, in the problems that the farmer has today, but possibly what aspires his children, where are they going to go, what happens to them. I think that will help us understand the future context better. I would like to bring in Param to, be able to share a few perspectives on that ground.
So, look, I think this is a very good question, and there's no easy answer. If you're solving something that is going to come out into the world, 6 months from now, that's a certain kind of Farsight that you need. But if you're working on, let's say, something like an automobile would typically take, anywhere from, if you're lucky, a couple of years, or it could take 10 years or 5 years. Of course, the cycles are coming down, but in that industry, it can take years before, or even medicines, right? It can take, literally years sometimes for a medicine to come out into the market. So you have to then think about 5 years from now, what would the world look like? What would the scenario look like? And there are various inputs that you can take to inform some of those questions that you asked, right? But at the same time, you also need to co-create. You also need to imagine. You also need to do, participatory design sessions with users or experts, or as you said rightly, Siddhi, that users themselves may not have that complete context. You might need to talk to experts. So I generally advocate mixed methods. You cannot say that one specific type of input will help. You need to be able to triangulate or use variety of different inputs to provoke ideas or questions for us to think about what might be those future needs. The last thing I'll say is the value of prototyping. When we are imagining something that is very different from the current reality, the only way it becomes more believable is if we prototype it. There are great stories about when Steve Jobs was first working on the first retail chain stores of Apple. And until then, Apple never had its own stores. And he was very clear he didn't want the cookie cutter sort of retail shops that were in the market at that time. And, nobody could imagine walking into an electronic shop. For us now, walking into an Apple is, it's become part of normal life now. But back at
I think he's lost connection again. So Ayush, coming to your project, which was to do with bias in algorithms, right? How did you actually frame this brief up? You began exploring a couple of applications that became the Kickstarter for this journey. If you can expand, on that perspective a little bit. How did you come up with this brief? What was your journey like?
Yeah. So, of course, I did not start originally by thinking that, okay, I have to work with algorithmic bias and I have to work on inclusivity in AI. My process was that I was interested in artificial generated imagery. That was the main interest, the curiosity that I had, that, okay, this is an area that I would like to explore. And when I started exploring it, I came across multiple softwares and multiple mediums through which I can create images, or I also experimented with text, with and with a lot of other stuff. So in that process, I came across this website, and when I saw that, when I first just tried to create a face, and I saw that, okay, what's happening here? So I was really intrigued. There are literally 6 sliders, and I can adjust my facial characteristics based on those. So that's where I started becoming interested in, and then I started reading more about it. So I found, there's an MIT research by a person called Joy Golomini, who has done immense work in this area, where in algorithmic bias. So her project inspired me to, continue my investigation into this and maybe work upon something, and so that led me to create this project.
So Ayush, do you see it more of a wake-up call to the tech industry in general, or a provocation on thinking further about this? Like, how do you envision the outcome of this project?
So I do. So it was, for me personally, it was a wake-up call, because, of course, we all live in a world that's being now we are moving towards a world where AI is becoming more and more. It's coming into our lives, and knowingly or unknowingly, we interact with it every day. But of course, none of us know completely its functioning. Most of us do not know how it functions. What are the implications? Now, I've been reading that there have been several errors in facial recognition systems, like and in AI also. Like Amazon recently, it had it made a software that could filter out your resumes. If you're applying for a job, it can filter out your resume. And so in order to make the process easier. But then there was a major flaw that while filtering out, it was discriminating based on the gender of the applicant, because the data that had been given to the algorithm was mostly populated by male applicants. So whenever there was a female applicant, the algorithm would automatically reject the resume. So these are the kind of biases that are creeping into AI. And of course, the people who, the engineers and the software developers, they are aware of it and now working towards it. But I think that it's also important that we are the end users of it. We are the ones who are affected by it, the common people. So, I think it's important that, people know about what's happening. So that's, I think, a wake-up call, which, I can call it a wake-up call. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ayush. Isal, your project on, illustrating the day-to-day narratives that you observed during the COVID pandemic was very, very interesting. So what was your tool for gathering some of these narratives? Was it narratives that you gathered from a personal experience point of view? Or did you also get, the third person perspective? How did you go about that?
Yeah, so most of it was kind of my own. Like, I was sitting at home for like about 2 years and after high school. And so that time I had like a lot to think about. And the comic, though, it was like more or less to do with my own, whatever I was thinking about. But as a whole, also, I think there is like a lot of people like me, because in this time when like Ayush was talking about, like, AI is coming up, all these different changes are happening. So it's a world that's still rapidly evolving, and we're becoming dependent on technologies like AI and stuff. And people kind of, I also personally felt like everything had kind of come to a stop, and now you can't really do much. And you're like 20 years old, you're supposed to be out, you're supposed to be doing things, but you just can't do that. You can't explore your own freedom. So it was more like, it was more to incite thought into thinking where you kind of want to play into this whole drama and this chaos that's happening, and how this world is changing, and how you kind of want to fit into this picture. Yeah, and like, while Ayush and you guys were talking, I was thinking, when we think about why, like, Param was talking about, you have to question what if medicines did not exist or something. So I was thinking about why we need medicines at all, because animals, like, they have much better immune systems than us, and we've kind of become dependent on these medicines and like drugs and stuff. So we're, in a sense, we're kind of changing what it means to be human just by becoming reliant on all these different things we're inventing. And so I think it's important to have a bigger picture plan of what you want to do with anything you create. So if you're like trying to make something that makes your life easier, why do you want to do that? Because maybe in the far future it might just be a handicap that'll make you dependent on it. So I think that it's a very hazy line about how we want to go into the future, and whether it's any good, because like now we're trying to undo all the bad things that have happened because of the industrial revolutions. We're trying to create sustainable designs that undo this impact. And so like, it's like we're going ahead, but we're also kind of going back. So we're kind of confused where we want to stand. So
Yes.
yeah, it's like a very ruminating kind of thing. This is the kind of thing I was thinking about. So kind of
Right.
put that in the comic so that people could
Right.
think about it in that sense.
Right. So, Amogh, do we continue with this, or are we taking any questions from the other participants? What do you think we should do?
Yeah, let's continue this discussion for a bit, and then in a while we can take up questions from the audience.
Okay.
There's one question/comment which even I had for Param that often comes up in conversations with people, that people are scared that AIs might replace their jobs. And you are working as a designer in a very AI-focused company. So what are your thoughts on that? Do you feel threatened? Do you feel fear? Or do you feel hope about that?
Look, I'm not an AI expert. I'm more of a design specialist, but I think what I'm seeing is that things evolve irrespective of whether there's AI or not, right? 20, 25, 30 years back when the internet first came into the world, people thought that the internet was going to make people redundant. And it probably did, right? I mean, to some extent, some people have lost their There are so many occupations that have become redundant over time because of the internet taking away some of those options that that we had earlier. But the point is, so I don't know if AI itself is the culprit. I think with the growth of technology, with the growth of the evolution of mankind, it will happen. It has always happened. It will continue to happen, that things will evolve. And therefore what we can do, and at the same time, I think I look at it a bit optimistically, which is that human beings are fundamentally resilient. There is an innate survival skill that we all have, and of course, I mean, some of us are much more privileged, and therefore it's easy for me to say this. But can we create more equal opportunity so that people can be resilient and equally survive equally? Probably that's where we are falling short. But I do believe that fundamentally human beings are more resilient and have an ability to evolve with those changing times. And so similarly, we will figure that out even with AI, and it's already happening. So it will also open up a lot more opportunities that we did not have earlier. Yeah.
Param, I have a quick question for you. Sorry, Urja, I'll just take one last question with Param. Param, is there a concept of sustainability even when we look at all these digital technologies and digital assets? Because finally, even though it is intangible, all these various things that we use, the storage per se happens to have physical manifestations, right? How does the industry look at this?
Great question. So, I mean, we used to think, or at least the popular notion was that because it's digital, it's not harming the environment. That's not really true. It's just that the way the environment is getting harmed is different. So, for example, data centers are becoming larger and larger, and data centers are one of the big concerning factors as far as the use of digital technologies is concerned. The more and more things are moving to the cloud in the last 5 years, and will continue to do so. It is going to add a significant, burden from a climate change perspective. So I'm already seeing that a large number of the Fortune 500 companies, especially, and some of the more progressive ones, are already starting to put down mandates. For example, some of the CIOs have a very explicit mandate from the boards of their companies saying, by the next 5 years or 3 years, you're going to reduce the amount of emission that is coming from your data centers, even though all your work in the organization is moving to the cloud. So I think that is it's still at a nascent stage from what I understand. So, but we definitely need to think, even though it's digital, is there a footprint that we are leaving behind? Like, for example, as a consumer, I think a lot more about, do I really, if I can order something on Amazon or on any other online website, it's easy for me to order it, but do I really need it? Do I really want to, have someone send me a FedEx or courier or something to me, and see that footprint being left? So there is always a physical footprint, even though it's a digital front end. At least that's how I see it.
Yeah. Urja, you wanted to come in?
I just wanted to ask a question to Param actually again. I'm so sorry. But it's just a small question. So I'm graduating as a designer, and I did the abductive questioning for my project, right? Asking the question, what if? And I realized after prototyping that, you need to really ask the right people who know certain details about the tangent of speculation you want to do to kind of create the new familiar future or kind of articulate that kind of a thing. But what we realize is, like, one of the questions I asked, similar to the one you asked in transportation, right? What if the future of transportation was without owning cars? And one of the mental models, or like in a business standpoint of view, if I'm owning Tata, I wouldn't want that to happen, right? I wouldn't encourage sharing. I would encourage ownership. So so in these moments when the future is clear, that a way for efficient future, right, or a sustainable future, but there is not a vested interest by the business directly involved in kind of making that future happen, do we leave this scenario to the market and the law of economics and change, like the customers will ask for it and etc.? Or would you suggest any way that we as designers can come in and kind of be instrumental in making the what if come true?
Okay, that's a multi-billion-dollar question. If I had the right answer to that, I would be a billionaire by now. But look, I think this is the fundamental problem, or the maybe the opportunity also, while it's a problem, that as we become successful at something, and this is true even for individuals, by the way, it's not just true for organizations. When we do something that works, we as human beings get attached to that, and then we become risk averse, and then we don't want to try something else because we're afraid that what is already working is going to get broken. And there is that whole philosophy and mindset of why fix something that is not broken. So when everything is going well, it's just easier and much more safer to follow status quo. And so asking some of those questions, I've learned a few things, right? I mean, who are you asking that question to? Number one, in the organization, right? If you're talking to the wrong stakeholder and asking the right question but to the wrong stakeholder, the answer is still going to be a wrong answer. So I think being able to talk to the right decision makers is the first sort of big aspect to it. Second aspect of it is it's about knowing how to frame that question in a way that is acceptable or palatable to the stakeholder. If I go and ask a question that is provocative but is threatening, then the person is going to back off. Then the person is going to be like, you know what? Okay, this is all sounding like cannibalization. I don't want to go there. This is not what I can do, or what I can influence, or this is not what's going to happen. There's going to be defensive sort of a response. But if I were to frame that question and ask that question in a more how do I say adjacent sort of manner, then the question can get different. So, for example, right back in 2009. I remember meeting a marketing person in a large automobile company. And they had done the study with a management consulting firm where they were talking about what would be the future of the automobile industry in India in 2020. And this is way back in 2008 or 9. And so this consulting firm had put out a report saying this is what the market is going to be like. There are type A cars, which are going to be this much percentage of the market, type B cars, and so on and so forth. And all I did was I just asked a question saying, how do you know if these segments are going to even exist in 2020? It's not like I knew Uber is going to happen. It's not like I had a premonition or I had some prediction device in my hand. So it's not like I had the right answer, but at least I was able to ask him that question saying, listen, I don't know if what if these segments are not going to exist? I didn't even know. I didn't even ask him a question saying, what if ownership didn't matter? Because I didn't know Uber was going to happen. But at least I said, how do you know if these segments are going to exist? And as things have now played out in 2021, you can see that a whole new segment has emerged, which is people who don't want to own a car, but still need transportation. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of it is about framing, talking to the right stakeholder, presenting it in a non-threatening way. And also somebody else asked a question about where does the role of speculative design come into industry? I don't know if you or someone else asked that, but I think my answer to that is I don't know what do you mean by speculative design, because these terms can mean very different things to different people, and so the way I look at it is that the work I've been doing, you can call it speculative design at one level, but at another level, people call it innovation, people call it design thinking, people call it design strategy, people call it just product development also, right? So these are all different terminologies that we don't need to obsess over which is the right terminology. But if a company is interested in thinking about becoming relevant, staying relevant in the future, then definitely our skills and our way of thinking about those problems will matter. The question is, are we talking to the right stakeholder? And one thing I've learned in the last 10 years is I don't normally take up any new job unless I know that the CEO is totally behind reinventing the future using design. And if that interest and that commitment is not there, then fundamentally I will not succeed. And that's one of my yardsticks I've learned over the years, that's an important yardstick. It doesn't get you guaranteed commitment, but in the rest of the organization, but at least it's a starting point. Sorry, long-winded answer, but yeah.
No, thank you. That was helpful.
Thank you, Param, and thanks, Urja, for that question. Now, I'd like to call on Ms. Tanishka Kachru to ask the questions that have been coming up in the Q&A section and the comments on YouTube.
Yeah, hi, Amogh. Thanks. It was so amazing to hear all of you, talk about from your perspectives, and today we have a variety of perspectives from Mamata, who's an educator and a researcher, to all these young people about to step out and also start their learning journey, and Param, who's spent so many years thinking about these things, these questions. So
when you said young people, I thought you were talking about me. So.
And yeah, so we have an audience that has asked some questions. I'm going to pick out a few for the panel. We have about 10 minutes to go through this. I think one of the questions that I find really interesting is that somebody, I'm not sure who's asking this, but I think it is an anonymous question. Being asked from the point of view of an aspiring designer. So I thought this was an interesting question, because he's asking whether, can you be a designer? Can you think about futures, even if, you're not trained and lacking in a formal degree, he or she is asking. So how, I mean, we have a lot of examples of, people who are visionaries, who see the future, or we recognize them, and they, sometimes many of them are outside of what we call design and the design profession. So I think the interesting question here would be what is, how can designers specifically be, trained do you think we are, in a position to do this better than others, or is it something about the person and how they see the world that makes this possible? Or is there something in design training that's allows this to happen? A question for Param and Mamata, actually, I think probably. Either of you.
Mamata, do you want to go first?
Okay. I feel there is something about the training as well. And of course, people who are not designers may also be forecasting different set of futures. But what I have begun to see, at least teaching and conversing with a lot of students, is our students are very comfortable with ambiguity, right? And because they become comfortable with ambiguity, I think the what if questions begin to occur in their mind, probably. And they're not very worried about exploring the space, whether they are able to do it successfully or they have failure. But I think they believe in exploring. So the training that these, we as a community, a design community get, probably it helps us get to future better. But that said, I think all startups, technology startups, I would say, they are engineering design people, and they definitely do a lot of future forecasting. In fact, I would say companies like Google and Microsoft, I'm sure they must have even set us sailing. They might be knowing what we might be doing in 2050 already, right? Because they are forecasting certain products in future, and they are hoping that we catch on to the trend that they will set. So I think there is a larger community which does look at forecasting, but through training, we do have those tools and methods per se. Param?
So, yeah, my point of view on this is it's not an either or. The way I think is that every discipline, whether it's design, whether it's anthropology, whether it's psychology, whether it's management, whether it is technology, science, physics, whatever, every discipline has something to contribute, is how I see it. I don't think designers can lay claim to be the only or the best futurists or whatever. I think the discipline helps, but any discipline will contribute, will help. But I think what matters more is the person's attitude towards, like I said in my presentation, what matters more is, are we able to look within and question our own beliefs, our biases, our mental models and fears about the future? And are we able to ask the right questions? Because that's really what is the first thing. Second thing is, can we work together as a cross-functional team? Can we work in multidisciplinary skills? Can we work at the intersection of multiple disciplines? That I think is a more important, attitude and a skill to have going forward in the world than just saying that I know this one particular discipline very well and I'm going to go deep in that and I'm the best in that. That's not going to cut it. I think the best futurists probably will be the ones who can work at the intersection of different disciplines and know how to take people along also and collaborate with people. I think that's how I see it.
Thanks, Param. I think this is something that we've also been thinking about in terms of education in academia, this sort of interdisciplinary, sort of collaborative space. How do you actually create that within, education, where we tend to sort of operate within very, in these strict kind of silos? As it doesn't matter in what kind of program you are, we all seem to tend to do that because we see ourselves as these specializations. So, but it's time, I think we all recognize it's time to sort of break that. And one of the, I think, great debates is, that has been happening in NID over the past couple of years, is that how do we transition from being, in the model that we are right now to this model where we become, we actually start making those collaborative spaces to interact with other disciplines. And I think that's one of the questions that maybe somebody is asking. Ayushi Botika, I think, is asking, is sort of hinting at this. She says, what is the one most important role a designer plays in an AI project that they might not be very prominent in other projects? I don't know if I've got this right. Ayushi, if you're here, would you like to ask the question more clearly yourself? We can sort of unmute you. You can let us know in the chat box. Maybe not.
Let me take a crack at it. I think from what I understood from the question, I mean, again, it's hard to say what might be very specific to AI, but from whatever little I've learned now in the last couple of years of working in this domain, I think the whole aspect of thinking about the qualitative, thinking about the emotional, thinking about the experiential aspects of technology, excuse me, is one way of thinking about it, right? So to give you a tangible example, if there's an AI model that is helping us think about what is the next sort of communication to the customer, we as designers can actually start, while of course there's a lot of data that is being used to figure out what is the best message, personalized message to give to the customer. As designers, we can actually ask a more fundamental divergent question saying, what is relevant, what are the life needs of that person in that different in those moments of truth for the person, what are they doing, what is he or she trying to do, what are they trying to achieve, and where might be some emotional needs playing up in that, right? The emotional need might be that, when I'm falling sick is when I want all communication. When I'm not, when I'm completely well and I'm hale and hearty, I don't want to be contacted and I don't want to be sent any messages by the company. So those qualitative and emotional aspects we as designers can actually bring in, and that can change the way we think about developing the AI model. I mean, this is just one example, but there are so many different dimensions. But fundamentally, I think it is about humanizing. It's about bringing the human dimension into whatever it is that you're developing the AI solution for. Ultimately, AI is either augmenting a human being or is helping a human being or is, doing some human activity. So there is always a human dimension. It's about being able to bring in that human dimension into the problem.
I think, thank you. It seems that we have run out of time, but I would still, if any of the panelists, would like to also maybe ask a question or respond to any of the questions that were posed, I invite you to do that before we close the session. Mamata or Siddhi or Urja, anyone? Ayush?
I just want to comment one thing, all of us are really focusing and concentrating on asking the right question. And while on my graduation project journey, when I was talking to people asking about this, there was one response which was always there, that if Henry Ford had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. But, the answer to that question also lies in the question itself, that it's about asking the right question, and it's about understanding as designers, instead of directly going and asking what is it that you want. So I feel that's like, yeah, that is something which was reminded to me after these series of questions which we were all trying to ask ourselves as well.
Important point. I'd just like to say that, Param, there are a couple of questions directed at you, which are in the Q&A box. You could even type your answers if you'd like to answer them.
I can answer it now. I mean,
yeah, please go ahead.
This is a question to Param. When you say you learned it the hard way to ensure that the CEO of the firm would keen bring forth change, what are some of the ways in which you might have navigated the situation between conservative clients who are not willing to see the design perspective? Can you explain the relevance of UX UI factors for design? Okay, I'll take the first question. The second question is a bit broad. Look, I think what are the ways to navigate that? There are various strategies, right? I mean, there's no right answer, but one thing is to maybe get an expert to talk to the expert, right? If you are not seen as an expert, or if you're struggling to get across in a way that is credible, get someone that the client is looking at as an expert to speak on your behalf and establish credibility about what you're recommending or what you're proposing as a way to solve that problem. The second could be that build a prototype, build a concept, or build a tangible expression of what your point of view is. Maybe that might spark some openness, or at least a conversation to say, okay, this is leading me to think differently about the problem. The third is go out and do some research. Go out and meet some people, consumers or people or users or whoever it is that you're solving the problem for, and come up with a reframed way of looking at that problem in a way that your client or your whoever you're solving the problem for has not thought about. That could be one quick way of saying, hey, here's a grounded point of view, grounded in in the user insight, but something that you're not thinking about at this moment. So there are so many different ways, but these are some top 2 or 3 ideas that just popped up in my head.
Right. So there are a few other questions. So I think what we can possibly do is we can send the questions to Param. And if you don't mind, Param, if you could spend some time, we'll email out the answers to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us, despite all the difficulties. Now, I'm going to hand back to our moderator, Amogh, to thank everyone and also to invite everybody to the next session of the series tomorrow and tell us a little bit about it. So over to you, Amogh.
Thank you so much, Tanishka, and thank you so much to all the speakers and panelists who took out their valuable time to join us today. We'd like to take this opportunity to remind you that the upcoming section of Point of View will happen for the next 4 days. We have with us a series of exciting sessions planned to facilitate conversations between industry professionals, academicians, alumni, and young designers. Up next on our panel will be Anab Jain, who will be coming to tomorrow's Farsight session from 6 to 7:30 p.m. over the Zoom webinar platform and on YouTube Live. So we conclude today's session on Farsight. Thank you so much to everyone once again.
Thank you, Amogh. Thank you, Tanishka and Praveen. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
See you tomorrow.
Bye, everyone.
Please
Thank
join
you.
us.
Bye.
Bye.